Welcome to the Ardan Labs Podcast. Our special guest today is Jasson Casey. Jasson, dude, thank you, bro, for hanging out with us for the next hour and a half, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
For the few people on this planet, Jasson, don't know who you are. Give everybody the 2-minute spiel on what you're doing today, but focus on today. I don't want you to leak anything out. You know, this is a talk about you, your journey. So just today.
So my name is Jasson Casey. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Beyond Identity. Yeah, what I'm focused on today is reducing or preventing security incidents at companies by actually focusing on this thing we call identity defense. We believe 70 to 80% of all security incidents, some of which grow up to become breaches, are actually failures of the identity system. And when you kind of systematically look at it, you can get the data and the proof out of threat reports, whether it's Mandiant, Verizon DBIR, or CrowdStrike. When you look at the history of identity products, you can kind of see why. They were built around productivity concepts. How do I get you to work fast? Necessarily built around security concepts. And again, it doesn't take too much to peel back the onion. Think about how much a credential, whether it's a password or an access token, actually tells you not just about the person, but about the device, the workload of the device, the safety of the device, the geography of the device relative to what service or data it's asking for. I've been in security long enough to kind of get me to focus on this in the last, really since 2019. And I think this is the biggest threat to the world right now is identity related exploitation. And I think identity defense is the best way of solving it through, 80 to 90% prevention and 10 to 20% detection and response.
Before we jump into the time machine for a second, anything security wise always drives my brain crazy because it's such a very large, almost generic sort of topic. So when you say identity, two things. The first thing that popped in my head was the way you were talking was how I'm authenticating into systems. But then my brain went into the LifeLock situation where I'm trying to keep track of anything happening on my credit report, right? So yeah. Are you talking about both one or the other, or they're just it's a gray area?
So if you put on your nerd hat, clearly it's all black and white, and there's identity assurance, there's authentication assurance, there's authorization, and there's audit. And these are three very different things. But if you switch out for the pragmatist hat, they're highly related. And if you're not thinking about all of them when you're kind of building out your architecture, or whether you're building your product or your company, you're very likely going to not leave the window open, but build a hole in your building that people and things can come straight in through.
See, I hate OAuth. I hate it. I hate it. Anytime that comes up and it's my only option,
yeah,
I get very angry. I just don't want to use that for authentication. And then a lot of times I go back into whether it's Google or GitHub and I remove it. Because I don't know why. And I've coded it. I've had to, I've been asked to do it and I hate it. I like having a separate username and password for everything.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I love the ideas that Blue Sky are putting forward with this sort of single identity that was tied to DNS.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody could really spoof who I am because obviously anytime you get my email address, you can change everything on the planet,
mm-hmm.
which was a hard lesson I had to teach my daughter one day. I kind of like that idea that your identity is in one place, maybe decentralized, and you can sort of carry it yourself with. Have you looked at what Blue Sky is doing with that protocol?
I haven't. The ideas that we're really kind of wedded to is around authentication assurance should be what we call device bound and hardware backed. And these ideas are 30 to 40 years old. They got their start originally in DRM, digital rights management, whether it was for gaming or for media. But at the end of the day, they've had a resurgence in trusted computing. And the idea is really, how do I know if I'm software, how do I know what hardware I'm running on? If I'm hardware, how do I make sure I only authorize the correct software to use these certain hardware capabilities? And we're not a big believer in kind of probabilistic controls as a primary defense. We're a big believer in deterministic controls. So when we talk about authentication assurance, we're not saying we know who you are with respect to some government entity. What we're saying is, I know exactly that you are the same device and user on that device that visited me yesterday is visiting me now. under the assumption that the hardware manufacturer of the Infineon chip has not been, their supply chain has not been compromised. Like that's the level of hardware assurance that we're looking for. And so when we say hardware backed device bound, what we really mean is hardware backed is you're using these special coprocessors to manage these signing keys for authentication. And when you move from secrets that have to be shared to signing keys, you don't have to move or copy a piece of data around. If you don't copy it around, you're actually drastically reducing what is one of the big root causes for compromise. And then when we say
Yeah.
device bound, we mean what we really mean is flipping that switch in the hardware that guarantees that key can't actually be read off that crypto processor. It will never end up in memory. Like it's literally not readable. So it's hardware backed and device bound. It's a very concrete thing. And we think, at least for authentication assurance, that is the only gold standard because it gives you provability back to a manufacturer.
Gotcha. Yeah, what's interesting to me about security is that the more secure you want to be, the more inconvenienced you have to be.
Yes, historically that's true. I would argue that's changed. Do you have an Apple phone or an Android phone?
I have Apple MacBook and phone.
Okay, so do you ever use Apple Pay?
I do occasionally when I have to, when it's maybe in the apps I've been using it more because it's a double click, right?
So maybe this is more of a good story for the audience then. If you have Android phone or an Apple phone and you ever use Google Pay or Apple Pay at the coffee shop to buy a cup of coffee or a cup of tea,
Yeah, I
you're
never do
actually,
that. Never.
you never do that.
No, 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 no. I feel like I'm aging out a little bit, but my wife does it all the time. My wife does
Well,
that all the time.
your wife is actually using a hardware-backed, device-bound, high security mechanism to do something called single device multi-factor authentication to pay for a cup of coffee. And for her, it's seamless, it's effortless. But from a technology perspective, it's way more secure than the password manager you probably have and that second factor device that you have.
But you're saying it's more secure because nobody could really steal that signal or take a picture of the card, or there's no way to basically reproduce the transaction in some form or another.
Exactly. So it's the same concepts exist in blockchain. The reason I'm saying it's secure is ultimately, so let's back up a little bit. If we want to talk about the fundamentals of security, so let's go to the fundamentals of security. When I authenticate traditionally, I do it with a shared secret, right? A password is fundamentally a shared secret. You know the password ahead of time. I know the password. Same thing with like a TOTP fob, right? There's this thing called a seed, and the seed is a pre-shared secret. That's how we rotate and we're taking a random walk, but we're taking it together. That's kind of how we're able to kind of prove that we possess the same thing. These secrets, we argue, are actually one of the root causes of today's security incidents. And our argument is by definition, a symmetric secret has to be shared. And the act of sharing leaves a shadow in memory of every device I ever talk to or every device I go through. And that is an indefensible surface area that has to be protected that adversaries can basically just hoover up credentials from. And that's why the bad guy generally logs in today. They don't break in. And if you could move from a shared secret to an asymmetric secret where it doesn't have to move, right? The secret thing doesn't have to move. I could shrink that surface area, right? I could really eliminate that attack surface. If I could do it provably, right? This hardware-backed device-bound method, I could do it under hardware level guarantees that that key can't move. That is a level of kind of assurance and trust that actually is kind of gold standard in high defense applications. And the mobile payments industry has kind of spoon fed it to us with sugar through mobile payments.
I can't disagree with you because I have a password manager and I make sure that no account is using the same credentials. So if something gets leaked there, right, the surface area of what they can get to is so. But at that point, I'm an expert user. Nobody does that, right? Everybody's got maybe 3 passwords. Even the 17-year-old who just went to college, I had to put her on a password manager because I was like, you can't do this,
So I
right?
would argue even then you're containing the blast radius, but you still have a significant problem. Like right now we see a lot of threat actors man in the middling connections, and they're doing it in very various different ways. Some of them using kind of the high levels of sophistication of they control a telco and they can interdict the TLS connection. But others are actually doing it through fairly low tech applications. They're compromising a third party that you're using as a third party load balancer or a content distribution network. or a third-party managed message bus, or a third-party managed service mesh for your Kubernetes cluster. So modern developers today essentially open their TLS connection 4 to 5 times to third parties on almost every application they build, yet still treat that connection as if it's supplied end-to-end trust. So in that scenario where they have a password manager, you have a unique password for each service. That password for some of those services actually still does exist on the dark web and certain access brokers and can be purchased. And you ask, well, how in the world? I use a password manager, I never share it anywhere. Well, the fact is, it has to be shared through usage. And it's not actually going between you and the service. It's going through a ton of services to get to that service, all of which can be attacked, all of which have insider threats. Like, things that move are actually the problem when it comes to authentication.
So, Jason, how do you sleep at night? Or let's say make it worse. How do you log into your bank at home with your brain sort of probably like, right? You start to visualize everything that's happening at the moment.
Yeah.
You sort of log into the bank, right? Like how do you sleep at night at that point, dude? Because I think it could be overwhelming for somebody like you that like has
The
visualization of this.
well, there's two things, right? Like number one, you could focus on all the bad things in the world and essentially never get out of bed. Or you could take what you can control and get out of bed and get excited to go do that, right? And that's kind of like our mission here. Whether it's with us at Beyond Identity or another company, we feel very strongly the whole world needs to move to identity defense. And identity defense really at the center has this concept of this hardware-backed, device-bound credential management. There's a couple other concepts there as well. But like by doing these things, you're not going to eliminate all incidents, but for the modern organization, you're going to eliminate 70 to 80% of the SOC ticket workload, right? And that is actually absolutely doable. And maybe you're thinking, hey, I work more on the product side. I don't really have to worry about this. You do as well, right? Think about that access token that you're sharing out. Like, is it really a shared secret? Are you really doing proper HMAC on that access token? Or is the service that you probably included by doing 30 minutes of research really doing the right thing? Because again, like the adversary doesn't have to break in, they can log in. A lot of these initial access brokers will actually sell these access tokens. In fact, this big activity with SalesLoft and Drift that we've been reading about in the news over the last 2 weeks is in fact exactly that. Compromised access tokens basically being reused to access Salesforce accounts, and where organizations had kept proprietary information, sometimes even secrets, just getting kind of hoovered up.
Yeah, no. It's crazy. I hate security, man. Boy, do I hate security. I try to tell everybody, don't write your own. Like, gotta find the things out there that are certified and work. Don't write your own. The last thing you want is somebody walking in going, where'd you get this from? Oh, I wrote it. Yeah, no, not gonna work.
Yeah,
All right.
it's a
Yeah, we want Casey writing them, is what I was about to say. All right. So Jasson Casey wrote this. We're fine.
yeah. I don't know about that. I put code in production in a few years, but you definitely want like security protocol professionals, crypto protocol professionals. That is a discipline. That is an area of training. You don't just wake up in one morning and start doing it. You get mentorship, you do studying, and you practice.
All right. This was awesome. We're going to come back to this, but I got to get you into the time machine, Jason.
Okay.
So, a couple of questions before we start here. What year did you graduate from high school and where were you on the planet?
Oh wow, high school. I graduated from high school in 1997, and I was in northern Houston, Texas.
Houston, Texas. Okay, perfect. 97. I graduated in 87. So
Okay.
I got 10 years on you. All right. And now I want you to clear your mind, clear your head. Don't think too hard. I want that first memory of you sort of working on a computer, making that first memory you have of like making the computer do something, and you were like, wow, this is cool.
First memory of working on a computer was probably in the 80s. My dad brought home what he called a laptop. He worked in the oil industry. This laptop was it was the size of a toaster oven, like a large toaster oven, and the keyboard flipped out of the front face.
Was this a K Pro? Was this a
I don't,
luggage, like a suitcase?
yeah, it looked like a suitcase. It looked
This
like
might have been a K Pro, man. I had one of those, dude. The keyboard locked in and it
orange
came off.
screen.
Orange. Mine might have been green, but yeah, same.
Yeah,
I know I can imagine exactly what your dad just came home with. Yeah.
and you basically booted with a floppy.
Yeah.
It had the classics, right? It had Oregon Trail. It had some card game, and then it had an operating system, which
Was it CPM? Was it CPM?
I really don't remember.
I want you write down K Pro 2.
All right, K Pro 2.
They used the Roman numerals for that. I
Okay.
just looked that up later. I'm sure there were a couple companies that were doing it, but that would have been like 85, 86. Pro was putting out those portable machines.
I remember that. Then I remember getting into simulation games. And then I remember someone introducing me to this concept called a modem. And you could hook your computer up to your phone line, which was a sure way of getting your mom to yell at you.
When she picked up the phone, because all moms lived, all those landlines had that device on the back of it so they could go like this all day. And
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. And there was nothing worse than being in the middle. Actually, this is later. This is in the 90s, but I'm in a dogfight with a buddy, and my mom picks up the phone. And it all goes south from there. But yeah, the earliest memories with the computer were honestly discovering games. I explored some of the games on my dad's computer. I thought the concept of the operating system and the organization of it was fascinating. First time I learned to program was on one of those. Or it was slightly more advanced machine, but it was still like an orange monitor machine, and the language was like
What was
Pascal.
that? Pascal.
Yeah,
Okay, that's fair.
yeah.
I never got into gaming, even though I was programming in the 80s. I was writing games I couldn't even play. I'm just not a gamer.
Hmm.
So even as this whole revolution of games, my kids got into it. It's not me. But did you, even at your age today, do you enjoy playing those games on the whatever it is today, the Xbox, PlayStation, whatever?
I love the nostalgia and the idea of playing games. I don't have a lot of time for it, but look, in high school for me, the computer games I loved the most were like simulations. It was like F9. It was a bad simulator. It was F-19 Strike Fighter, I think it was called, and then there was another one called Falcon 3.3.0, and then later Falcon 4.0. But I did get into like things like Police Quest and King's Quest, and there's another example of something they would have never made today. Larry the Lounge Suit Lizard. Uh,
Yeah,
They were Sierra games. They were Sierra games. But this also from maybe like the either the really early 90s or the late 80s.
so that means were you going? Did you have like the arcade in the community? Because I wasn't even into the arcades, honestly. Like I don't know why. It just never appealed to me. Were you doing that stuff too?
I love the arcades, but honestly, the arcades required money.
Yeah.
Whereas my buddy lived down the street. So I had he was like the friend whose dad was rich and well traveled. And I think can't remember if he worked for a Japanese company or if he serviced a Japanese company. But he would go to Japan on a fairly regular basis and come back with all of these exotic toys. And they were games, but they were also ways of like ripping games. Let's see, I lived in like Lafayette, Louisiana at the time. So this would have been like sixth grade, seventh grade. I don't even know what year that would have been. Early
Would have
90s.
been like 93, maybe 92, 93. 6 years prior to graduation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh no. Yeah, maybe.
probably earlier than that, because in '94 I was already back to Houston, and I had lived in Corpus Christi and then Victoria, Texas before then. But yeah, we moved a lot. But yeah, no, I gaming today, it's maybe a fantasy that I have in a moment when I'm thinking about what would I do if I actually have time. Also, games today are very different, right? Like games today are like these massive movie style experiences.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
fun. Every now and then over the last decade, I'd buy a game around Thanksgiving and I'd play it for a week or two with my nieces and nephews when they would visit. But um, that my adult gaming is kind of limited to that.
See, I'm not a gamer, but what is fascinating to me now is the leveraging of the AI for the what do they call them? NPCs,
Non-player.
non-player characters or something. I don't know, but the idea now that you run a model now there and let that takes on right like the game now just takes on a real life of its own once you
Yeah.
can sort of leverage that, especially with the way these models are reasoning today. It's almost like you're coding a game and there's nothing deterministic about it almost at all at some level.
Yeah, you'd probably get a different experience every time. there's an author, Neil Stevenson. He wrote, what book did he write? There was a book that he wrote maybe 15 years ago where he went into a lot of depth about the NPCs. Oh, okay, I remember. It's called Reamde, Reamde. And he goes into this elaborate depth of the NPCs in the game and how they actually were how they were actually coding it up, how they were using certain things. And this was all backstory to the real story that he was telling. But it was incredibly prescient in terms of the art of what's possible and kind of these massive multiplayer online games where you need to bring kind of artificial constructs to interact with real people in a way that makes them feel like they're getting something out of it, but still scales to make a business work.
I don't know, it's wild to me. But
Yeah.
no, yeah. Again, and that's a whole nother level of programming too. Like people are like, they talk to me about games. I'm like, yeah, no, that's another whole nother genre of software development that you kind of have to learn.
Yeah.
All right, but let's talk about high school just a tiny bit. What else were you doing in high, like, right? So from 94, let's say, to 97, like, what are you into in high school? You playing sports, your band, your, like, what are you doing?
I was on the tennis team. I played tennis competitively, at least until at least I got to the Woodlands, and then I ran into people that were like ranked in the nation, like top 50 sort of thing, and I realized I wasn't that good.
Isn't it crazy when you meet somebody like that? Like, you're playing competitively, you feel
Yeah,
like, you're not there, but you don't feel like you're that far off. And then you
yeah.
meet somebody like that and they just kick your ass, like with no effort. And you're just like, okay. It's happened to me a couple times in ping pong or
hmm
racquetball or basketball where it's just so humbling, man.
It's also incredible to see someone play at that level from an inspiration perspective, right? That like the art of what's possible. But then you peel back the onion and you learn a little bit about them, and they were almost born with a racket in their hand. Their parents sent them to live-away camps once they were about 6 to 7 years old. Like it's a very different childhood. It's a very different experience. So like they're certainly freaks of nature and talent, but they've also made some very, or at least someone's made some of these choices for them, very conscious trades to get to that point. But yeah, we had
But
a couple
you
of those.
still need the DNA. Like,
Oh, for
I don't
sure,
care. You
for
still
sure.
need the DNA to be able to play at that. I mean, hours in practice. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
You've got to be in the right place. You've got to have the innate capability, and you've got to pretty much give it everything you have.
But you lose your childhood. I had some friends who lost their childhood and the parents would never accept that they weren't going to get to that level. Like at some point, you, even with my son playing ball, like at some point I looked at him, I said, I'm glad we're playing at this level, like, travel teams and all that. We have to, reality is now setting in, right? Like these kids are maturing faster than you, they're doing more than you. I don't mind doing this, but, right. And he
Yeah,
even turns around and says, yeah, you know what? I'd like my life back. Good.
yeah.
It's tough.
Here at Ardan Labs, we believe in empowering companies to reach their full potential through innovative technology solutions. Trusted by small startups and Fortune 500 companies alike, we specialize in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, development, and now AI. With over 14 years of experience, Ardan Labs has trained over 30,000 engineers and served over 1,000 companies worldwide. Whether you're mastering Go, Rust, Kubernetes, Terraform, or blockchain, we're your strategic partner for performance-grade solutions. Let's elevate your tech journey together. Reach out to Ardan Labs today.
Well, that was kind of the moment for me, right? I got to that, so I moved a lot as a kid. And so we moved to this new high school, I think right in the middle of 10th grade, between fall and spring. And I get there, and I had been, I wasn't the best, but I was decent on the tennis team from the place I was coming from. And I get to this place. It's very obvious that like I'm not gonna improve fast enough to compete at the level of these people. And so I took the moment and actually kind of dropped out of the tennis program and decided, well, this is a high school that's kind of set up like a university. There's a fall and spring. Classes only run for a semester at a time. You only take 3 or 4 per semester.
Wow.
And they had a really big catalog. I was a big reader. I was into learning things. I really liked science. I liked math. And so I took the extra time because I didn't have to take athletics or tennis as a course anymore. And, I took chemistry and I took geometry and I took physics. That, I would say, kind of got me excited and interested in these other things. Coming into that high school, I wasn't really on the advanced track, right? Like I hadn't taken geometry and I was a sophomore. And generally, like that's if generally you do that either you're eighth grade or ninth grade if you're on the more advanced track. But by the time I graduated, I had taken like two courses in biology, 2 courses in chemistry, molecular genetics, 2 courses in calculus, 2 courses in physics, placed out of all of them from an AP perspective, and all in a kind of a short period of time. And that was afforded partly by kind of realizing, hey, I can't compete with tennis. What else is there to offer?
But I'm kind of curious when you go back to your parents and say, I don't want to play tennis anymore. Were they
They were
the
disappointed.
catalyst? They were, right? Okay. So that wasn't going to be a fun conversation to,
Yeah, but I mean, when you're 14, 15 years old, like how much are you actually thinking? You're not that empathetic. In fact, you're probably more of a psychopath. So I
I don't
didn't
know about that. I don't know about that. I
really.
mean, I, I could, I don't know about that, right? Especially if this is something that your parents are pushing, right? You just don't want to be in trouble or you don't want to be disappointed. Or you just don't want to be bothered, right? Right. That's why you do things sometimes as a teenager because you just don't want to be bothered.
Yeah, I guess for me it was I knew it was gonna disappoint them, but I didn't care.
No, that's good. That was fair, right?
Yeah.
That was good. But it ended up, but it's interesting that you had it. What I want to explore there for a few minutes is was your ability to do all of that in 2 years discipline or passion? Because that's hard for somebody that age to be that sort of mature, to sort of rip through all that material in 2 years,
I would
especially now that you got your freedom.
I would say it was a mix. So some of those courses I didn't want to take and my parents forced it on me, like English, the advanced English courses and literature courses. Growing up, my experience was very much, there were always high expectations and there was always more on the table for you to achieve. So why weren't you doing that? So like some of it was that, some of it was passion. So like I was introduced to the concept of physics. I didn't really understand it. I took a physics course, my first physics course. Actually, I'll never forget the teacher is Miss Monroe. And I thought the class was the coolest thing ever. Like, wait, what do you mean I could actually predict where this car is going to stop? What do you mean I could predict the flight of a ball? What do you mean there's a model for reality? Like these concepts kind of blew my mind. And so that was absolutely a passion. I would say math, I I didn't have a great pre-calc teacher. And so I rolled into calc almost as an obligation. I don't think I did that well for the first semester. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, the physics stuff I'm really interested in requires me to actually have a really good grounding in calculus. And so actually, I'll never forget this story. My calculus teacher, my senior year in high school, called my parents suggesting I drop out of the class. And I don't think I was doing well that first fall. I think I was getting like a C or something. And I basically just taught myself the course in the spring, and I aced that exam. Like I actually got a perfect score at the end of the year on it. But it was motivation, and it was because I realized I needed this to do this other thing that I really got excited by, and that really excited by thing was physics.
See, I love that, right? Because this is from a parenting perspective, right? When you have kids at that age, if till they find the thing they want to do, they're just not going to be motivated to do anything. My girls found early, like near the end of high school, what they wanted to do and have excelled ever since. My boys didn't find it in high school, and they're just sort of finding it now at 21, 22, which thank God they're finding it because now they're stable and now they're right. They have that goal. So anytime I hear a story about somebody in high school sort of finding that thing they want to do or passionate, it's for me, it's a beautiful thing
Hmm.
because it allows that person to kind of get on that road a little sooner. You seem to have found it in physics. So then I imagine that when you're going to graduate high school, you want to sort of pursue The physics? Is that like where's your
Yeah,
head?
that actually was it. When I applied to college, I applied to the physics and engineering programs, and my thought process was, "Hey, I love physics. I've been and my second physics teacher also loaded me up with all these books. So I'd read everything written about Feynman, written by Feynman. I had the Feynman lectures that I would listen to in the mornings when I was had an hour or two before class. So I was all in for physics, but at the same time, I didn't know a lot of physicists, and it didn't seem like they got jobs outside of and so I thought I needed a backup. And so my plan was to double major, and I'll do this thing called electrical engineering because from what I can tell, my dad was a double E, and it seems like double E's can get jobs. And double E seems like the most physics oriented engineering program I could go to. So it kind of felt like I was not necessarily stepping too far away from the thing that was truly fascinating to me. Yeah, that was how it started.
That's interesting. So what university did you end up going to, or at least starting at?
University of Texas. I applied to a handful of universities. I got into a subset of them, and then I was faced with the cold hard reality of like university cost money. I was a Texas resident, and UT Austin was like a top 10 school for what I wanted to do, and it was also like I know it's more expensive today, but even then I think it was like $5,000 for the entire year. Like it felt like a steal. I could get a subsidized or I could get some sort of government loan to like pay for half of it. I could get a job to pay for the other half. It wasn't going to like it wasn't going to be complicated to figure out how to pay for. And it was again like a top 10 school. And the other thought process was it's a big enough university where if I screw up and this isn't really what I want, there are other things there.
Yeah. Plus, they got a hell of a football program, so you're gonna have some fun on Saturday.
We we walked into some pretty epic football. I'll never forget. I'm not a huge football guy, but I did go to almost all the home games that first year. Saw Ricky Williams play. Saw Major Applewhite step in off the bench and just literally right off the bench throw a long, long pass for a touchdown. Like I saw some really, really great college players then.
Yeah, no, no. I when my daughter, number six, my stepdaughter was looking at colleges, we were kind of nudging her towards Notre Dame. She's at St. Mary's now, but I kept telling her, "You want that football experience. You need that school that has that sports because I feel like it adds another sort of dimension of getting everybody sort of together, right?
Hmm.
Now you've got alumni anywhere you go on the planet, right? And you sort of have that. I don't know. I think it's an important part of that being part of that university, having that connection with others that you've never met. You walk by the airport, you're wearing the colors, right?
It's instant community. It
Yeah.
really is.
What was your? I'm assuming that you graduated from there. You finished that 4 year degree. So one of my favorite questions is always like thinking back on those 4 years, and I'm assuming you majored in electrical and you got a minor in physics, or you did both.
I realized I couldn't do both and swing a job, and so I gave up on the physics the physics double major. I did the double E. My focus was on computer engineering, so like think like microarchitecture, embedded systems, that sort of thing. And yeah, I worked writing software at the same time as a way of kind of helping pay for things as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that too. Like, was the job on campus, or were you
No.
able to get something related in the field?
So I, through a friend of the family, worked at an oil company. Actually, it wasn't an oil company. It was a geoscience company. And they sold software into the oil industry. He told me about an internship program they had. And so I ended up getting an internship there my first summer. And the gist of the internship was, hey, you know math, right? And I was like, yeah. And it's like, all right, you know how to write code in C, right? And I was like, yeah, because I'd done a bunch of robotics projects in high school. I'd learned how to write in C. And they're like, all right, well, this job is really just geometry and C. It's not that hard. You'll figure it out. And I guess I didn't screw it up. So they actually made me a part-time employee for my first 2 years of school. So I used that to help pay for school. But it was fun. Like I got exposed to, I mean, I was exposed to Unix at school, but like this was like legit. You have to learn what libc does. You have to actually learn how the Unix operating system works. I had a Solaris on my, I think a Spark 2 on my desk, and I also had a SGI Onyx on my desk. And I had to make sure my software ran properly on both. Ultimately, I was working in the research group, so my job was to kind of help. My job was literally to be the LLM for my boss around like skeleton code. That was too trivial for him, but still requiring some level of
How many hours a week did you work
about
on
20
average?
on average.
That's a lot, dude. Full course load, 20 hours a week. I guess they allowed you to work around your schedule, which is
Oh
good.
yeah, they were super flexible. Like they cared about was eventual progress. Like they were incredibly generous.
Did you ever once think, I'll just do this full time. I don't need to finish my degree. I'm already in industry.
The absolute fear of my parents, yes. So actually, there's a pretty funny story there. I finished most of my coursework inside of 3 years, and actually went full time. And the courses that I was left with were the ones that I was highly, highly uninterested in. So like a government course, fine arts elective. I feel
Your
bad.
liberal arts, like you had some liberal art
Yeah,
classes
yeah, yeah.
left that you had to fulfill.
And I feel bad saying this out loud because I love the arts. I love I do actually like going to shows and museums, and I love history. But at the time, I couldn't be bothered. I wanted to just be working. And yeah, I think there was one particular course that I didn't fail it, but I wasn't going to pass, so I dropped it like 3 times. And the last semester of that fourth year, where I was literally just working on 2 courses over 3 semesters, over and over and over again.
Wow.
I took a job in another city, and I was literally just flying in on a Southwest plane to take the exam and then fly back.
Wow. Wow.
So yeah, I almost did not finish my undergraduate.
Wow. That's interesting. Yeah, it makes sense to me, right? Like you're just like you're done with school. I'm already making money. This is a pain in my ass. Like, but you got it done, right? That's good.
It's hard to put myself back in my mindset from back then. I don't know how much of it was obligation versus desire, but yeah, I eventually figured it out.
Because I still have. I was okay. Just real quick. I was never. I never had the status of senior in my undergraduate. I was. It was so cold outside, and I hated going to class. I never went to class,
Yeah,
and it was like I finished my 4 years, and I still had like 28 credits left.
yeah.
And my mom sat me down and she said, "You're going to get it done now or it's over." And I somehow did 28 credits in this one last, and it had the best, I had a B that it was my best semester ever.
Yeah.
Right. And I got it done,
You
but
made
I'm
it your,
not in,
you made it your job.
I made it my job to just get that done in any
Yeah.
way possible.
Yeah.
So somebody a long time ago was like, "Bill, we can't find you in the yearbook." I'm like, yeah, I never got invited to be in the yearbook because I was never a senior. I
Yeah.
just went from one stats to, but I still wake up sometimes like with nightmares thinking I didn't graduate and I got to go look at the diploma on the wall.
I had nightmares about missing my final exam until I was 30, early 30s.
It's interesting. Yeah. Wow.
The anxiety dreams follow you for quite some time.
Yeah. I haven't had that in a while, but yeah, I would say for a good 20 years, I would have that. Yeah. Anxiety dream. I like that. I like the way you labeled that. I would have that anxiety dream that I really didn't graduate because I was messing around. But your parents must have been like my mom wasn't well, like I said, she lectured me and then I got it done. So it happened very quickly. But yours is over 3 semesters. So that's almost like a year and a half where your parents must have been just on you a little bit at a
I'm
time.
sure they thought I wasn't going to finish. Because yeah, I was doing my own thing. I kept enrolling. I kept trying to take that class. Honestly, I think in the end, I actually depend. So this one particular class, it's like a D is technically not failing, and you can get your degree for it. And I think I got a D in that class, and I finally said, I don't care. I'm done. This is enough. They'll check the box. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah, no, we had really bad attitudes. We were like, our GPA isn't on the diploma, or you just got to pass. That was like the attitude.
Yeah.
Just got to pass. Just got to pass. Just get this thing done. Just got to
Yeah,
pass.
my GPA inversely correlated to my work status. So when I went from part-time to full-time, it definitely took a dive. But I was also done with all like if you looked at the courses I really got into, like I did pretty well in them because I used them, like microarchitecture design, graphics, operating systems, like that kind of stuff. Like that was really, really exciting. The signal processing and circuits courses, like wish I had spent more time paying attention to them, but like I knew I wasn't going to work in that area, at least initially. The reason I say I wish is like there are some projects I'm working now where I'm finding myself actually going back and like teaching myself the material so I can kind of understand a little bit about what's going on. But I guess the benefit of a foundational education is you can teach yourself.
Yeah, I wouldn't even have expected you to remember that completely, right?
Yeah.
But it's like riding the. So my wife, who has an industrial engineering degree, her math is so much better than mine. I did the Calc 1, the Calc 2. I stopped there.
Hmm.
I was honestly very immature at the time I was going to school, really immature.
I feel like you're
But now what?
a late teenager, early 20-year-old is immature. That's shocking.
No, I was yeah, no. I was super immature, man. And I think maturity has a lot to do with your ability to learn and have that discipline. But my wife's math skills are just way beyond mine. Like when the kids have the math they're doing today now, or even like trigonometry and the geometry and some of the higher end, like I could open up the book and I know I can learn it. It's or relearn it at some level. But she still to this day has it in her head. It's mind blowing to me sometimes where I'm like, she doesn't even have to, or she'll skim a page and then she'll sit down and start doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, if I could have your brain for just a couple days, what I could do, because I feel like I'm doing pretty good with this brain, but it's not even close to what your brain is right now, right?
Yeah. That's her
It's just,
fundamentals.
it's just, yeah, it's mind blowing to me that she has that. I imagine that even with you, you probably just have to, you know, even less than an hour, just absorb it, and then it all sort of comes back.
Some of it does, some of it, but I question whether I ever had it. So for instance, like I can flip through like microarchitecture stuff and that comes back pretty quick because I knew it pretty well and it doesn't take much. But then on the flip side, I may be looking at some like complex analysis stuff, right? So this turns out to be really important in signal processing. And I'm kind of convinced I never really learned it. And it takes a bit, right? And the good news is like most things, there are a few fundamental principles that once you really understand them, you can kind of compose them in different ways and kind of get what you need. But yeah, the some of it is you're just scraping the cobwebs off, and some of it I honestly question if I ever truly knew it.
So how long were you with this company, right? Because you started working, you did get to graduate.
Yeah.
You're doing this work. How long were you with them?
So that part-time company that helped me get through the first 2 years, I was with them for 2 years. Then a buddy of mine,
So what year is that then? Like you finished with them in like
99.
2003
That was
or
99.
99. So you graduated high school in 97.
Hmm.
Well, you would have graduated on time if it were like in 91,
So
right?
I graduated high school in 97. I started college in the fall of 97. When I showed up, I was qualified as a junior. I had 60 some odd hours of credits.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
So I didn't really have to take any of the what do they call them? Leveling courses. I could jump straight into my material. So by the first 2 years, I was kind of done with most of my engineering curriculum. And I still had a lot of stuff that I was deferring, and then I had some of the engineering courses that are just required for you to take, but aren't necessarily germane to your focus area, and that kind of described my last 2 years. So a buddy of mine worked at a startup at the time, and I had always been fascinated with the idea of startup companies. Um, and he's like, "Hey man, you can code, uh, and you understand systems, and you should come work for us." And it was a bizarre thing for me. I walked in, I interviewed with a guy, he asked me what kind of work I'd worked on. I showed him a little bit. He did the technical screen, and they gave me a job. I was 19 years old, and they gave me a full-time job.
How did you know this guy at 19? Because you don't really have a network yet.
I
So,
had a network. It's called the Nerd Net. I want to say my first or second week in college, I went to my first party, and I ended up talking with a dude in the corner, and we spent most of our time talking about, we were comparing AP tests and scores and the nuances of Linux versus Solaris. And yeah, so at a place like UT, it's almost like nerds magnet to each other. And so yeah, I met this guy first year. We were friends, but all we would ever talk about was technical things. He was a sysadmin. He had built with a buddy of his like a little ISP in Fort Worth, Texas, when he was in high school. And so he was a sysadmin with like 4 or 5 years experience adminning Solaris, and he understood Gate D, and he could configure BGP, and so like he taught me networking things, and I would do software things for him. And he got hired as a network admin for the startup, and they needed someone who had some software skills to work on the protocol side of things because it was a voice over IP company. And the people were all telco engineers. They weren't necessarily like software engineers. And it was also, the wild, wild west of the late 90s Austin tech scene. So yeah, they hired me. I was radically unqualified, but I bought a bunch of books and a cot, and I slept at the office, and I figured it out.
VoIP was really brand new
Yeah.
in the early 90s. I was working for a company that were building inbound, outbound systems for call centers, trying to compete with the big telcos.
Yeah.
And I remember we were trying to introduce VoIP as a way of not having to pay for the big telco, right? $1 million telco system that was, I mean, their systems were solid, dude, like worked
Arbitrage.
out. But just the computing wasn't like the processors really made that hard because of though again, it's voice, right? So you have somebody cuts out, you don't have to go back, right? You could
Yeah.
just keep going. But no, there were real challenges just with the power of the computing we had. I remember.
Yeah, no, it was fun, and it was fascinating. I didn't really know telco systems. The company kind of taught me telco systems, but I did understand the basics of socket programming, and I understood the basics of networking. And yeah, their insight was like, look, it wasn't just theirs. A couple people had this, but the human can tolerate a lot of error in audio. It's cheaper to build a packet-based network than a circuit switch network. And the future is going to be packet-based networks anyway. So if you have a way of running voice on a packet network, you're going to have a cheaper operation, and you're going to be able to grow faster and capture new markets versus old stodgy telco. And so that was their insight. So they raised all in. I think they raised like $300 million between like financing and cash. And we built a nationwide U.S. network. We leased our IP, or we leased our optics. We ran our own IP network over an optical backplane, like a Sonnet backhaul network, and then bought these voice over IP gateways, and we would buy trunks from the local telco in like large quantities, like bundles of DS3s. A DS3 is like, what is it, 700-ish calls per DS3, and we would just buy big chunks of them in all these markets. And because of how legislation or regulation worked at the time, we would just pay a flat fee.
That's wild. Yeah. I think if I remember when we were playing with it, compression where we were at, like compression allowed you to win or lose that game or something, right?
So
You
for
never
us, it
compressed
was
it.
that makes sense in the enterprise. We were operating in the carrier space, so compression
Mm,
existed. So a baseline phone call uses something called G7.11. They're not really compressing the audio. What they're doing is they're quantizing the audio. So it turns out for human speech, linear sampling isn't optimal. You actually want nonlinear sampling to reproduce a slightly better audio signal. Then there are these compression codecs called G729, could take like a 64 kilobit audio stream and shrink it down to 9. But when you look at the bandwidth savings that gives you versus the cost of bandwidth, right? So like I just talked about a 64 kilobit audio connection, but we were buying gigabit, or we were buying OC12 and OC48 connectivity. So we were buying in the gigabit to multi-gigabit range, putting kilobits on top of it. Yeah, I could spend extra money and go buy this fancy hardware to do the compression, or I could just buy more bandwidth. And so we went the buy more bandwidth route.
nice. Interesting. So how long are you with this company? Because that's pretty technical work. I mean, that's
I
really
was with that
technical.
company for 2 years. It was like dog years. I married the company. I literally lived in there were several periods of time where I would sleep at the office. We had a shower. It was fascinating. Any project you were willing to like embark on, the company would support you. Like it was an environment of too many problems, not enough people, not enough money. If you want to go tackle one, have at it. Just prove to us you're not going to be reckless. And so it was my grad school. Even though I technically hadn't graduated yet, but it was amazing. I learned a ton.
So then why leave after 2 years?
The business failed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right
Um,
after the money.
So the business felt in a really interesting way too. So the telcos at the time, they were all customers of each other and competitors of each other. And so we kind of mismanaged our cash a little bit. Like we used cash where we should have used some debt financing. So we may have had like a low cash volume in our bank account. And one of our competitors who was also giving us traffic, they realized that we had screwed up our routing. And so they were giving us traffic to terminate that we were turning around and giving back to them. We were charging them less than they were charging us to re-terminate that traffic.
Oh my God.
They realized that and they didn't tell us, they just turned the dial up. And then they waited for us to catch on, and the minute we catched on, they filed an injunction for payment, and that forced us to lock up the cash we had on hand, and we had to file Chapter 11.
That's evil, man. Evil.
That was yeah, Quest Communications did that to us.
That's evil.
The
Wow.
that was the world, and so I didn't know. Again, I didn't know what any of this meant at the time. I had to have it all explained to me. I stayed on a little bit during the Chapter 11 to kind of help run things. But I had a girlfriend at the time, and she had moved to Dallas when she graduated for a teaching job, and I decided I wanted to find a way to get to Dallas. So one of the vendors that was calling on me, I called them up and said, "Hey, I need a reason to be in Dallas. I have an idea for how you can use your product. I'll introduce you to these three prospects that might buy your product. Would you hire me as a software engineer?" And they ended up hiring me, not as a software engineer, but that's kind of how why I ended up leaving that company and moving to North Texas.
Wow. Nice. So now you move. You had to move in with your girlfriend, though. There's a big change there, Jason.
Yeah, it felt normal. By the way, we're now married, but
That's good.
yeah,
You never
but
know where these stories are going to go when you don't know. Okay. So
yeah,
that's
no,
good. You ended up marrying this
it
girl.
worked. It worked out. It worked out. But yeah, the and that company worked out too. That company ended up being the next ride in the journey.
So what was this? So how long are you at this next company then? You're there for,
I was at this next company for about 3 years.
and you weren't doing software development? What were you doing over there?
Yeah, so this company they were a startup that were a chip manufacturer, and they built this thing that was very early version of software-defined networking. And one of their co-founders was a guy who invented this thing called the FPP and RSP. This guy named Vic Bennett, and it was a network processor, and it turns out it's the gear network processor that almost all the heavy equipment kind of used in their high-end network processing cards, right? So think like ATM switches, edge routers that hang off ATM networks at the time, that sort of thing. And they had built a version of the chip that could do essentially regular expressions at line rate. So over to it is a big deal at the time. It could load a pattern and do pattern matching and substitution at 1 to 2 gigabits with minimal latency, or the latency you would actually expect for a switch. And the problem I was working on at the Austin failed startup was a firewall problem. How do I take my VoIP network and someone else's VoIP network and peer them without exposing the fact they're on a private network, I'm on a private network, so we have to remap, right? I have a security domain, they have a security domain. I don't want to allow like just pure access. And voice over IP has a signaling protocol and a data protocol or a media protocol. And a lot of the voice over IP protocols at the time, they create all these layer violations, which is a fancy way of saying deep inside of the packet, it talks about IP and port and protocol information about another thing that's going to show up. It crosses a NAT boundary, kind of invalidates itself. The minute it crosses a firewall, it kind of invalidates itself. So I was trying to figure out, how do I get a firewall and a NAT that are VoIP smart, right, and can kind of handle this? And I called this company, and they had been thinking about maybe they could solve that problem. And I pitched them on my version of how they could build a voice over IP firewall, at least what it would look like from a customer's perspective, and what the state of the art was, given alternative equipment. And it turns out, because I had been working on this problem, I knew my counterparts at Level 3 and Global Crossing and a few other companies, and so I was more than happy to make the introduction. So yeah, they hired me, but they said, "Hey, we want you to become this thing called a product manager."
Wow.
And it's like, I don't know what that is. And they're like, "Don't worry about it. Just show up." So yeah, that was I got that
Did
job.
you enjoy that though? Did you enjoy
I loved
getting
it.
your hands off it? You did. You enjoyed that.
Well, so
Why? What was it about that you enjoyed?
the product
You're
manager,
still young, dude. Wait a second. You're still young, right?
I
We're
was
talking
21.
about 2000. You're 21 years old.
Yeah.
You've got 5 years of sort of industry experience already, right? We're talking about 2005 right now, 2000.
2001.
Oh, 2001.
Yeah.
And you were doing so much so quickly. I can't even do the math on the years anymore. This is
Yeah,
2001.
yeah. I guess technically I was 22. Well, I would have been 22 in 2001. But yeah, I was 22. I had this job that I didn't really understand. But again, I knew what the product needed to look like. And it turns out that's really what the job of a product manager is. And in a highly technical business like ours, or this company's at the time, the company's called NetRake. It's since been bought and sold. But in a highly technical business, the product manager has to be respected by both customers, engineers, marketing, kind of everybody. And your customers are highly technical, right? Like your customers are also representing their companies at like the standards bodies like IETF, arguing over like BGP extensions. So your customers are highly technical. Your engineers by definition are highly technical, and you've got to sit in the middle of them. So if you're not technical, you're not going to work out. But also you've got to figure out what's the straightest line to revenue, what's the straightest line to what will work for these people, not what's ideal.
But how could you know that at 22, or I guess for the next 20 years now, this is what you're sort of perfecting?
Yeah, I mean,
this sort of role.
I'm giving you the 46-year-old's version. I don't think I would have like this at that time. The woman I worked with was a very seasoned product manager. She also grew up from the engineering route. She was a long-term kind of telco engineer, telco into product management. So like she was a great mentor. And it was a startup environment. So like the great thing about startups that at least I've been part of, and like generally why I tell people if they should go to a startup, is if you have the ability to work a problem, startup can almost never say no because they never have enough time and they never have enough people and they never have enough money. And if you have the understanding, and if you're going to act responsibly, and if you have some ability of tackling the problem, you're going to be let loose. And that was the environment. I had good mentorship, and so yeah, we just did it.
I think that role is also critically important. If you have somebody who can talk tech but also talk non-tech, right? You got to be able to do that translation.
Yeah.
But at 22, I don't imagine you have that ability like you obviously have today.
No, not at all. I had the benefit of the fact that my customers were engineers. So the first customer of that company was actually a Japanese telco. And I'll never forget the way we landed them. So the protocol that was all the rage at the time for voice over IP was called SIP, Session Initiation Protocol. And I was kind of like an autodidact with all the RFCs related to SIP. Like I knew it inside and out. I'd written all my own custom implementations of the protocol this is kind of how I learned. Like if I don't build, I can't prove to myself I know a thing. And so I knew this protocol inside and out. And, I'm also building out the roadmap for the company. So I'm a good product manager is always ahead of the engineering team in terms of what they're working on and thinking about. And the Japanese customer was really interested in solving this problem. They wanted to solve it on a time frame, and their first gate to just moving into a POC was, well, we want to see these three scenarios. Can you show us log trace output of what your product looks like in those three scenarios? And so I stayed up one night and I just hand cranked it all out myself.
Wow.
And there was another engineer. He was like a chip architect he was also incredibly diligent. And so I used him as like my checker. And then we gave them that output and they invited us to Japan for a POV.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. That was mind blowing. You must have felt great at that point. I mean,
I felt great. Another way of thinking about it too is you're just raising the stakes, right? Because you're clearly showing what the product could do, not what the product did do. We go to Japan, and it was me, a sales engineer that I just hired, and a head of customer success. And this was our first customer deployment. And anyone who's done business around the world already understands this, but I didn't. People behave differently around the world. People run networks differently around the world. Cultures and customs are just different. So we show up in Japan, and I had traveled through Europe and thought I was well traveled. So I experienced my first culture shock. It's like stepping off the rocket ship on Mars in a good way, but still like eyes wide, right? I was probably 23 at the time. I thought I was really adventurous from a food perspective. Turns out I wasn't. So all I would eat was rice for that first week. And so I was like losing weight. I was tired. And also we built our product, at least the operating system of our product was built on BSD. And BSD had a lot of networking bugs around things like memory protection in the kernel on DHCP. And it was before the era of things like CDP and what was it called? Link Layer Control Protocol, LCP. Long story short, Japan liked to build really, really big subnets, like thousands of hosts on one broadcast domain. And the rate of ARPs and reverse ARPs was faster than the little kernel thread in our OS could handle. And so I'll never forget, I took the Japanese team into a room to train them, right, on how to design with our product. Well, my sales engineer was going to hook it up and get the first demo running. And we come out an hour later, and Gabe turns to me. He's like, "Jason, old boy," he had a really thick Cajun accent. I can't do it justice. It's like, "Jason, old boy, this shit don't work." I was like, and so I sit down at the terminal and I see DB greater than. And it's like, well, I've never seen that before. And this is essentially what a BSD kernel panic looks like. And, so like the level of stress is through the roof. And the head of customer success, like he's fundamentally a salesperson. He's like, "Jason, I can't do anything here. I'm going home." And the SE also is still more of a salesperson. He's like, I can't do anything either. I'm going to go home. So I ended up staying. They left, fish out of water. And then the Japanese, like they're great culture. They're super detail focused, and their whole gist is if you give them everything, they'll reciprocate. And so every day we would work on this. Every day we'd go out to dinner. Every dinner we'd drink too much, and then I'd go back to the hotel and try and write up a big trip report and attach core dumps. And the goal was I provided enough information in a lucid way along for the team to diagnose the problem and give me a hot patch along with instructions on how to use it so that when I woke up the next day at 6 a.m., I could be prepared enough to go back into the office and kind of at least move the ball a yard down the field. We did this iteratively, but over the course of 2 weeks, we got it up and running. We got invited to, we got hosted at like the big boss's fancy restaurant. I had a breakdown moment where I was so hungry that I just started eating everything they put in front of me. And then I realized this food's actually really good. That started my food adventurism, which has since gotten even bigger. But we got a check from them a couple weeks later, $600,000. It was our first paying customer.
So this, like, is a theme with so many. Ignorance is bliss, right? You're 22. Ignorance is bliss. Those two other guys just go home because they're too seasoned, and you're like, I ain't giving up. Like today, you would have just went home, but like ignorance is bliss, man. It allows you to do things you never in a million years would sort of do if you knew better.
There are so many things about that initial trip that I'll remember till I die, right? Like made some really good friends, learned an incredible amount, built real partnership with our Japanese partners and customers, learned about a truly different culture. And then the food thing, like, I joke about it, but like food is very important to me. And at least one of the big parts started on that trip. Just eating over myself and tasting things.
But I imagine that when you saved that account, right? You made that happen because you stayed and you did that. I'm kind of curious. Did they just pat you on the back when you got home, or did they give you something for that work that you?
In fairness, there was definitely a team that was being whipped daily behind the scenes to make sure that I did have a patch for when I woke up. So it certainly wasn't all me. But yeah, no, we won that account. We used that money to show progress. We used that to actually raise our next round. That company let me as a 23-year-old essentially help set direction of the product. It was that company is a major reason, or at least a major pillar of who I am today. So yeah, no, they definitely they treated me very well.
So we've been talking for like over an hour, and you're only 22 right now in this story. I can't even imagine how much time we need to get through all of it. So we don't have time. So got like 20 minutes left with you. We got to sort of fast track between now and sort of where you are today. So when did you start with this company? The company that you're with?
2019.
What year did you start? 2019. Okay. And we're only in like 2002.
2003. Okay.
So you got 5 minutes to like tell me how we get to 2019 from here.
All right,
I I feel like you're staying every couple of years. Like, how many jobs are we talking about over this next 18 years or whatever that?
So I'll give you the cliff notes and then we can kind of drill in. So at the end of 2003, I started to become more wise and understanding of financing of startups and how that works. And while the company had been great to me in terms of learning and education, I learned about the preference stack and ultimately how that really meant that the company would eventually get bought, but no one would ever make any money. And once I kind of had that realization, one of my customers called and said, "Hey, we want you to come work for us. All these things you've been telling us we could do with your product, we want you to come help us make that a reality." So I went to work for a company called Level 3. From there, ultimately, that didn't really work out. Like the whole business unit that I was part of was speculative, and it got cut. That business unit got cut. And so at the same time, I needed a reason to move to Austin. Right, my then wife wanted to go back to grad school, and a friend of mine from NetRake was working for Alcatel, and he's like, "Well, we always need a good solutions architect. Just you come work for us; it'll be easy." I went to work for him. I was involved on the periphery in some big deals with AT&T. I didn't really do anything to deserve any of this, but they treated me like I did. And I learned pretty quickly that like I need technical excitement. Money's not enough. And the former boss from Level 3 went to another telco and said, "Hey, all those plans you built for us at Level 3, how would you like to execute them?" So I went from there and I joined him at a company called CenturyTel. Now they're called CenturyLink. And that was my first real executive job. I was 26. We did that
It's
for about
crazy how young you are in these positions. It's mind blowing to me.
So I built a team in Austin, Texas for this kind of Louisiana-based company. We built this product, launched it really fast. Culturally, I would say we weren't really that great of a fit with the telco because we were kind of this startup group of pirates that were just we didn't really care what the rules were. We were going to get stuff done. You know, we got stuff done, but we definitely rubbed a few people the wrong way. And ultimately, the product we were building probably wasn't right for the market of that particular business. And from there, I ended up kind of getting into just doing my own thing. So I started working on the software-defined networking stuff, and it was super fascinating, super fulfilling. Didn't make a ton of money at it, but developed a huge amount of relationships with a company called Bel Air Networks that since got bought by Ericsson, as well as Aruba Networks and a few others. At that point, I was feeling a little bit burnt out because all of these jobs, while I had kind of shifted every 2 to 3 years, I was putting, everything I had was going into them. And so my wife had just taken a position as a professor at Texas A&M. And so I've been trying to convince a professor to work on a technical project for me. And he's like, "Hey, you seem to be free. Why don't you do a PhD?" So I did a PhD. Wouldn't have been able to do that without finishing my undergrad. And yeah, that brought me back to that work that I'd been doing just before the PhD in software-defined networking. Started this nonprofit called Flowgrammable. We ended up being kind of one of the landing spots for people to kind of truly understand what this protocol called OpenFlow, how it worked, how things changed across variations. Dell actually took almost all of our material. We made it open source, but they took all of our material and basically stapled it as an appendix to all of their switch manuals. So that was pretty cool. And yeah, that brought me to the attention of a certain General Keith Alexander, and I joined him in this is 2014 to run engineering for his private endeavor, company called IronNet Cyber. In 2016, I was recruited to be the CTO of a company called Security Scorecard, run the whole R&D effort up in New York. And
So let me pause you for a second because it's the 2014 job is the first time you're not doing telco per se, right?
yes and no.
Everything up to there is okay. Go on.
Yeah. So the reason why I say yes and no is everything that I've always done in telco has always been at the IP layer. So I never really worked on ATM or cell or those other protocols. I was always working kind of packet-based networking. And when you go back to the fundamentals of what I was doing at NetRake, we were basically doing kind of packet capture and manipulation at line rate, a gigabit. And in 2001, 2003, a gigabit was state of the art. The software-defined networking work that I was doing had moved into the range of 10 gig and 25 gig and 40 gig and like the 2010, 2011 timeframe. And when you look at what General Alexander was doing with IronNet, he was basically doing behavioral analytics, which is line rate packet capture in a large data center environment. And you're basically trying to do real-time metadata analysis to find kind of the needle in the needle stack, right? Where is somebody running a C2 channel? Where is somebody doing this? So it's all the same techniques. And the other interesting thing is we had to do it on commodity hardware. We weren't allowed to design or build our own hardware. And so now you're like, all right, how do I squeeze everything out of the computer I have? And so you're thinking about like cache line misses and branch predictors and cache line predictors, and how do I structure my algorithms in a way to where the hardware is going to achieve maximal both parallelism, but also like all the prefetching and pre-caching stuff. Like how do I make that how do I make sure that I'm not getting in the way of all of that magic? And
Yeah, you're staying mechanically sympathetic with the hardware and
exactly.
networks, and yeah.
So that was the commonality. And then I also found myself being drawn more towards problem sets of, I don't want someone to tell me what the network looks like. I want to discover what the network looks like with some level of certainty. And it turns out that's an intelligence problem. And so, yeah, for most of the 2010s, I basically worked big data network intelligence. But it was kind of a natural follow-on from the 20-aughts.
Got you. And then tell me how Beyond Identity sort of comes calling. How does that come? Are you going after that? Are they coming after you? You're a very mature man at this point. You know what you want. Like, to get Jasson to work with you, you really have to make sure that he's going to be super excited and interesting in it, right?
Yeah, so
I want to hear about the recruiting of Jasson for Beyond Identity.
My wife and friends would debate the mature property. So 2019, resigned from Security Scorecard, and I wanted to start my own company. And I was going down this road of security analytics. And some of the observations I had taken with me coming out of Security Scorecard was the most likely indicators of whether a company will suffer a breach have to do with how do they manage passwords, how do they manage second factor, how do they manage endpoint patch management. Like those three things is really what the cyber insurers were deciding whether they were going to underwrite or not, at least a mid-market company. And so I had a large amount of analytic ideas kind of cooking around from my experience of the past decade. And I was thinking about starting a company in that area. But I also needed a break, right? Scorecard was intense. I gave them 3 years. So I took a trip to Greece. I wanted to sail a sailboat around the island. So we rented this 40-foot sailboat. It was just me and the wife and a bucket of books. And we hired a captain because we didn't want to do it all the time. And I got an email while I was on that trip saying, hey, this is Jim Clark. I want to meet you. I live in New York. And it's like one of the first books I read back way in Austin when I was at that telco company, Point One, was a Michael Lewis book called The New Thing. And it was about Jim Clark, the guy who created Silicon Graphics, the guy who created Netscape, the guy who created Healthion, which then became WebMD, along with some other things. And my initial response is, no, you're not. Delete.
Right. Like you see that email, you're like,
Yeah.
You do a little bit of work, right? You view the source, you're trying to figure out, is this legit?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're like, this is phishing.
It was, well, it was also, it's like, I represent Jim Clark, and those emails are usually just garbage, right?
Yeah.
But the dude's persistent, and I get a couple more during the trip, and finally I just I don't even know why I replied, but I replied saying, all right, sure, I'll meet you. And I'm back in New York next week. And the other kind of prophetic thing about this, like Jim is famous for being like super sailor, right? Like he's built some of the world's largest sailboats, sailed around the world, and done these massive underwater productions and whatnot. So like it's I guess there are moments of what's going on at the time that like make me a little bit more sympathetic. Is like, all right, maybe I will respond. So I get back to New York and I take a meeting with this guy, and this guy works for Jim, and Jim's serious as a heart attack, and him and his business partner and 2 of his engineers are wanting to start an authentication company. And they have a lot of experience with authentication around a system they had built for houses and boats. Like when I say houses, I mean like really big houses. And when I say boats, I mean like really big boats. And Jim's whole take is like, hey, we invented SSL back at Netscape. And, we solved the server authentication problem. We never solved the client authentication problem. And man, is it a pain in the ass, and I want to do that again. And I was thinking about it, and his techniques that he devised, they felt very clever. But the thing that really did it for me was, well, wait a minute. From all the knowledge that I have, I know for a fact that if you can manage credentials in a way where they can't be stolen, if you can ensure the device that's asking for access, whether it's service or data, is safe enough for the access that is being asked for, you can actually prevent most incidents. You can actually make an uninsurable company insurable. And that was the thing that clicked for me that made it kind of exciting. And so, yeah, we joined forces. When I say we joined forces, clearly Jim's the big partner in this and I'm the pipsqueak. But yeah, we started, originally the name was Zero PW. We created an office like 2 weeks after that, 2 weeks after that first meeting. Eventually we changed the name to Beyond Identity. But yeah, that was 2019.
Curious, did you ever ask them how they found out about you? Do you have any idea why your name ends up on his desk?
Yeah, I think it's actually just a coincidence, right? Like they described their search as they wanted to build a New York-based company and they wanted someone who was in New York. They wanted someone who had deep security experience, right? I'd run engineering for a couple of fairly sophisticated security outfits. And they wanted someone who had actually worked at startups, and not like any old startup, but kind of like tier one VC backed startups that kind of understood what that means, the good and the bad, right? And apparently that list is not very big, at least in 2019. Apparently that list is like 6 people. And yeah, I got the short rows or the long rows in the dating game.
You
Yeah,
got the
we
rose.
had the best chemistry.
That's awesome, man. So you basically, now I'm curious, right? It's 2019. Has Is everything just sort of like a white paper right now? Has anything been built? Are you walking into a green field, or are you walking into, we've got prototypes and now we got to figure out how to productize this?
Well, Nelson, so the engineers, Nelson and Mike, they had come from a previous company named Commandscape. And so they had worked this problem from a different angle for years. So they were very experienced and knowledgeable. But we basically clean roomed the product. So we started in 2019. Now Nelson and Mike already had quite a few things laid down because I think they got started in like March of that year, whereas I didn't really join the effort until September of that year. But we ran fast. We had our first POV in November, and when I say POV, we deployed at a customer for a proof of concept in November of 2019. We had our first paid customer March of the next year. We raised our first financing, I want to say, in like actually in March of the following year. Now that was a friends and family customer. And what I mean by that is everybody who's done a startup probably knows what that means. But it's a company that's predisposed to like you because you've worked with them before or you're friends with them in some way.
So what I'm curious about from a business perspective, right, is what is the cost of deploying this type of technology? And I know you're going to say, well, if you don't do it, the cost is higher, but forget about that for a second. Like, what's the real hard cost of deploying this, and what kind of companies should be like? I have a 45-person consulting company. We work for clients. Some
Yeah.
clients send us machines because their security levels are high, right? So, should a $5 million company be looking at this? A $20 million? What is the profile of someone who has to now seriously take this seriously?
Yeah. So the generic answer, there's a version of this available for everybody. But let me talk about the profile of our customer, because that'll probably be more germane to your question. We focus on regulated companies that are generally regulated, critical infrastructure, defense tech, governments, and big tech. So anyone who's the target of intellectual property theft, anyone who's the target of kind of organized campaigns of extortion, anyone who's the target of nation states, which turns out to be a lot of critical infrastructure, banking, logistics. So, there's a big war going on in Europe right now, right? That is producing a lot of cyber activity around critical infrastructure. There's the threat of encirclement and a war over in Asia, right, with China and Taiwan. That is producing a lot of kind of early reconnaissance and kind of like prepping the battlefield, if you will. And then there's everything in between in terms of crimes of opportunity as well as crimes of let's go get some money. Our customer is typically, they have a good security program, they have an EDR, they have an MD, they have a mature business. And what we provide for them is a way to kind of leverage their existing security framework into their identity stack. So we'll plug into their Okta, we'll plug into their Microsoft Intra, will also plug into their existing EDR, right? SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, Microsoft Defender. We'll tie all that together in what we call identity defense. And the impact we'll bring to them is no more phishing-based attacks for anything that's access-based. Session hijacking prevention, man-in-the-middle prevention for the purposes of session hijacking. And they'll see a reduction in security incidents. They'll see a reduction in help desk tickets. Like, these are quantifiable. We see them in our existing customers. Our customers will reference this on calls. But yeah, our customer is typically someone who already has a security architecture and either is compelled to operate in a certain way because of certain compliance, or they sell into a marketplace that is, and therefore they take some of that burden on themselves.
I feel like the biggest threat is not from the outside, but from the inside. Like that employee that gets disgruntled, that had access to this or that, and now decides that they're going to do something like retaliatory, right? Whatever that is, right? I always feel like the biggest jobs I've ever seen have come from the inside. So it seems like you're also able to monitor on the inside who's doing what at some level.
So here's a way of thinking about it. When you have a system that's based on passwords and tokens or symmetric secrets, there's nothing about that token that tells you about the device someone's working from. So you have to assume possession equals authorization. So like, hey, this credential was used to access these documents. All right, from what device? Well, I have no idea. Generally, it should only be these devices because we have these profiles in place, but I can't really say. So you have to take this conservative blast radius. When you're using a technology like ours that's hardware backed and device bound, just because someone's enrolled doesn't mean they have access to anything. You actually split the concept of enrollment and authorization. This gives you an ability to understand precisely at the time of access request, what person on what device and what geography with what workload on that device, right? So in the AI world, the question becomes like, what user authorized what agent running what model on what machine and what geography with what permissions for what time period? In a non-human world, it's kind of like what operator authorized what payload on what drone with what identity to go where, right? And in a workforce, it's all right, what worker on what computer with what existing security controls in what geography, right? Because GDPR and some of these national edicts are starting to kind of have teeth, is allowed to access what and for how long. So we can answer that precisely in a fine-grained way and also produce an audit after the fact that's tamper resistant.
No, it makes total sense, right? Like there's a lot of companies that won't let you use your own hardware. There are some that do, but regardless, right? Knowing what machine it was done on, and it could only have been done on that machine. It almost doesn't even matter if it was me doing it because I've allowed my machine to be compromised. So it's still my responsibility at the end of the day, right?
And the great, 100%. And that's one of the things with insider threat. Insider threat is a little easier to handle just because, for the most part, the long arm of the law is always available for you on insider threat. As an insider, if you do something, you're eventually going to be found out and you're going to go to jail. When we're talking about general cyber crime, our chances of sending that person to jail from Minsk or St. Peter
Yeah, you're right.
is zero, right?
North Korea or whatever, you're never getting to that person.
Exactly. So like there is no crime and punishment in when it comes to some of this international activity. Insider threat by definition applies. They have a relationship with your business in some way, shape, or form. That's not to say that it's not going to happen and you don't need to protect against it, but there's a lot more controls that you have on insider threat. We've actually seen a lot of companies focus less on prevention of insider threat and more on audit, because if they can always guarantee a tamper-proof audit, they can always guarantee that person is going to go to jail.
See, I don't know why, and I know there's aspects of the blockchain where you want to be anonymous, right? But when crime happens there, you have no recourse, like you're done. But if the blockchain had this, where we're validating not just that you have a private key, but a private key also tied to this machine, and nobody else can use that wallet unless they're on this machine. Like that too would reduce sort of somebody stealing your key and using it somewhere, right?
You can see this kind of starting. I read an article the other day. So there's a video game called Battlefield 6, and there's a big controversy around it right now because the latest release wants you to run Microsoft Secure Boot. And the reason it wants you to run Microsoft Secure Boot is they're leveraging technologies very similar to what I've just described, slightly different application, but they're using the same building blocks as cheat prevention. because when you do it in this way, right, and you know what person on what device, you can also add in a couple things that basically say this key will only work for this person on this device, and also if the hardware or operating system drivers haven't been modified in a specific way, which is how some of these more advanced cheats work. So yeah, I think it could work on the blockchain. I think it could work in a lot of applications.
Yeah. Yeah, I see it. I'm seeing it. It took me an hour and a half, but I'm starting to see it now. Like, why wouldn't you as an individual not want to do this? Especially where, like, again, I go back to, if somebody steals your email,
Hmm.
you're cooked. You're done. They reset everything in 10 minutes and you have no recourse. But if every one of those authentications was tied to the machine, and you could even geofence that, you wouldn't panic when your password got compromised because it's not enough.
They're the other crazy thing, or not crazy thing, but like really interesting thing, they're deterministic controls. They're not probabilistic. I'm not saying with 90% certainty you're operating from this machine. I'm saying with 100% certainty, under the only assumption that the manufacturer of this chip hasn't been compromised, it is in fact the exact same machine that enrolled this key.
Yeah. All right. I got one last question for you. I love asking people of all sort of levels this question. It might be interesting to ask this question to some people over there as well. What keeps you up at night? As it relates to the business, right? What keeps you up at night today?
Let's see. I mean, we protect some pretty high profile customers, so we're a target. And just like anyone, there's always things we could be doing better. There's always things we could start doing that we're not. Um, I'm always thinking through those scenarios. From a business perspective, this is my first time being a CEO. I'm 2 years in the job now. So, I'm operating a bit differently than I was a year ago, or certainly 2 years ago. But, what do I not know? What am I missing? I certainly have instincts that I trust on anything that is infrastructure, tech, defense related. But there's certainly areas where my instincts just aren't as developed, right? Like when you're pitching to an organization that doesn't value technology at all, how do you connect? Is I shouldn't say it doesn't value technology at all, but like is not tech or security driven or compliance driven. Like that is, that's a harder thing for me, and I definitely rely on pretty good team to kind of to help me, and then also shore some things up there. Yeah, what is it? Lots of things. Adversary.
Have you ever thought of joining one of these? I don't know if they still do it, but there were companies that started bringing CEOs together in small groups to mentor each other.
Yeah,
Have you ever thought about that?
I think that's called group therapy. Um, yeah. So the funny thing is, it kind of happens impromptu. As a VC-backed tech startup that sells to the enterprise, you're obliged to go to the certain events throughout the calendar year. And at these events, everyone is trying to kind of vie for your attention to buy their stuff, right? Whether it's banking products, let them invest in you in the next round, or trying to sell you something. One of the fringe benefits of these get-togethers is at some point in the evening, usually there's 6 or 7 of you around the table, see, just CEOs of startups, right? And you're all slightly different shades of the same problem, or you're all suffering from slightly different shades of the same problem. And so, yeah, these kind of group therapy things do show up.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good
Yeah,
to have that.
I try to talk to as many CEOs and founders as I can, just because it's like reading, right? Like life is short, your time is limited, you're never going to meet everyone, you're never going to see the world. So there are these other avenues to try and extend your experience, or at least get proxy experience. And talking to other people in your role is a great way for that. It's also hard though, right? Because your role by definition is almost all consuming. And so you almost have to make time and seek some of these people out sometime.
So I'll tell you this: I have, at a much smaller scale, I have the same problem,
Hmm.
and I haven't been able to fix it at a small scale. It's hate when I go to a website. Again, I'm putting myself in this category, a company website, and I can't within like 30 seconds know what you do. My website is bad, dude. I look at it and I started A/B testing at conferences, asking people, which one do you like better? Because I can't figure it out, right? And I'm in the industry, and you have this word identity-based attacks, and it's taken me an hour, I think, to understand what that means. So these are the things that drive me. Like, you don't want to be in a place where you have to educate people. You want to somehow get them to like click on, right? I'm looking at your homepage and my brain's going, I wish there was some sentence about what identity-based meant to help me read the rest of this homepage, so I could now really appreciate that I need this, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I have the same sort of problem. I think lots of companies have this problem, especially with all the products that you have,
Yeah.
right? And all the different things that you're doing.
Yeah, for us, it's definitely so message and positioning is hard no matter who you are. For us, we're definitely in the evangelism phase of what we do. Like what we do is we're not a category that already exists. Like we're just not. And the simplest thing that I've come up with or that we've come up with that tends to resonate, because we do the same thing at the conferences, like, hey, tell us which of this lands more, is it really just comes back to 70 to 80% of the security incidents your SOC deals with today are actually preventable. You don't have to suffer letting them happen and then spend time chasing them down. You can actually prevent them by just plugging us into your identity stack. Like that's what identity defense is about. If we want to double click a couple layers down, we can tell you all about like how it happens, how it comes about. We can take you through the MITRE ATT&CK framework and like what are all the variations. But at the end of the day, it really is about 70 to 80% of what brings risk to your organization and where you spend time could actually go away.
It's almost like you have to meet somebody who recently had the pain, because think about it, like again, I'm a small company, right? And I don't have this pain, so it doesn't resonate with me as much as it should after talking to you for an hour and a half, right?
Yeah.
And so you almost have to convince somebody that there's pain here, even though you're not feeling it yet, I guess. It's interesting, right?
Yeah, so for the folks that we target, they almost all have SOCs, security operations, and so that number is quantified. Like their CIO or CFO signs off on a budget in both headcount and tooling and time and materials for third parties to come in and help. So like it's very quantified. There's also a help desk angle. Like when you think about old school identity access systems, a certain amount of the help desk is always working on account lockouts and resets. And so that number is usually known at a large organization as well. Like in the companies that we deal with, that in itself is usually $1 million a year in expense, just dealing with account lockouts and password resets.
Yeah.
And it gets even higher in businesses that use like outsourced consultants and contractors and whatnot. So there's ways of quantifying it, but you're right. You have to be at a certain level. Below a certain size organization or below a certain kind of security risk, it ends up being more around good hygiene, right? So like we have this thing called an accelerator program where we'll let like pre-financed startups or essentially people with real risk, but without any sort of material budget. We'll let them have access to the product essentially gratis. But they also know they're a target, right? They're like an NGO and they do reporting in hostile areas or they're a defense tech or defense accelerators or that sort of thing.
So I have a client who's really in the AI platform business, companies that don't want to run in the cloud. They want their own stack. They want to be SOC 2 compliant. They make me run that Strata software. But between you, me, and the wall, Jasson, okay, I have to make sure my hard drive's encrypted, and
Yeah.
I have to do like it didn't give me the warm and fuzzy that I'm like doing anything real to earn SOC
Welcome
2.
to checklist-driven security.
Like it just whatever you need, man. I'll do these things, right? But I'll do whatever you want. But I don't know, dude. It didn't make me like want to go to sleep. I didn't sleep better. Let me just say that.
Yeah, so security compliance is interesting, right? But SOC specifically, like if you ask yourself, how many do companies who have SOC 2 not get breached? And there's a very clear answer to that, right? With that said, that this is just how compliance works the world over. If you want to do business with someone who falls under a certain regiment, you have to follow that regiment if you want to work with them. which you experienced.
Yeah. I don't
Yeah,
know.
so there,
Some
there,
of it makes me laugh.
yeah, there are things that actually one of my funnest interactions, and I say this facetiously, with an auditor was we're going through an audit, and they were getting to like the password management section of the audit, and they're like, "Well, show us how you rotate your passwords." And we're like, "Well, we don't have passwords in our system." They're like, "Well, I guess you're failing this finding." And I'm like, "Well," and like you'll get people that, and this happens in all industries, right? But you get people who follow a checklist that don't really remember the root cause of like why the checklist exists in the first place, and that can be quite frustrating at times.
Yeah. All right, dude. We are like so out of time. I couldn't cut us off early. And yeah, we could keep talking. I'm really enjoying the conversation.
Cool.
But we're out of time. For the people that have been listening, and we'll get this in the show notes. If somebody wanted to reach out and talk to you about the product or had a question from what they heard, what's the best way for somebody to reach out to you?
Yeah. So a couple different ways. You can hit the company in general on the website. I'm on LinkedIn and post fairly regularly. You can hit me directly on there. I'm on Twitter, I guess X. I'm more of a lurker. I don't really post a lot, but you're welcome to kind of hit me up there too. And yeah, we come to most of the security shows, and we have a heavy presence in New York and the Bay and Texas and DC.
Brilliant. You don't get out to the shows though, right? You have people
I
go
do.
to conferences. Oh, you do. Okay.
I'm dialing it back a little bit, but like I think this summer was crazy. I was only home for like 3 weekends the entire summer. Combination
Yeah,
like travel, show travel.
I did 3 weeks straight recently, and I used to live on the road, but now it just burns me out, man. 3 weeks is. I get it. You just want some time home. I totally get it. All right, so this is the Ardan Labs podcast signing off. Jason and Bill hope to see everybody again real soon. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks for having me.